Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Nathan and today we are doing a 2024 Circle of the Sea Druid build, a build I'm entitling the Maelstrom Walker. Now this is going to be a build, I'm going to be combining our Druid with a little dip in another class just to get a few things I want. And overall, this is going to be a very powerful, fun, and thematic character that's going to kind of capture the essence of this powerful storm over the waters. Now, one of the things I know is that recently there's been a lot of controversy about this subclass. Various different content creators have gone back and forth about whether or not the subclass is bad and that kind of thing. And so this is a build that I had planned for a little bit further down the line in terms of my sequence of things I was going to make. But considering everything that's been going on recently, I thought now might be a good time for it. Now, this isn't going to serve as like exactly my in-depth review of the subclass, but I just wanted to show kind of the ways that the subclass can be used and just one way it could potentially be powerful and fun to play. So here is our agenda for this video. I'm going to introduce and kind of talk about the overall concept of the build. Then I'll talk about our progression from level 1 to level 17. And at each key breakpoint, so level 6, level 9, level 13, and level 17, I'm going to do a damage report and kind of talk about what the tactics this character is going to use and be capable of. And as in my last build, the Draconic Trickster, I'm going to be not only assessing our peak damage per round and how well we perform in a max damage output encounter, but I'm also going to check how well we do over an encounter schedule of 4 encounters over the course of an adventuring day with a short rest right in the middle. After that, I'll summarize and kind of talk about the build as a whole and just kind of draw a few conclusions about my own design here. All right, our introduction and build concept. So this is going to be a powerful and thematic build using primarily the new Circle of the Sea Druid subclass. And again, you know, there has been a decent amount of discussion about this particular subclass. Pretty strong opinions either way. It's bad, it's good, and that kind of thing. Or it may be mechanically like reasonable but poorly designed, that kind of thing. And so originally when I was planning my first build that was where I did one for the 2014 and 2024 rules, the Storm Shaman build, and you can check a link for that up there. I was originally thinking I might actually use the Sea Druid for that video because one of the core concept of that build is that I wanted to get a lightning bolt in wisdom so I could use it with Channel Divinity on a Tempest Cleric, which I adapted over from the 2014 rules. Ultimately, I ended up going with Land Druid on that video because the 2014 version of that build also used Land Druid, so I wanted to show kind of how the two compared. But yeah, again, this is something I had planned for later, but again, with all the recent discussion, I moved this up to the front of my list to do. All right, so the main playstyle of this build is going to focus on a lot of being pretty mobile and also a lot of force movement and that kind of thing on enemies. This character is going to move in and out of close range and knock enemies around a lot like the beating waves of the tide, which I think functions pretty well in terms of the overall kind of themes of this subclass. Now, unlike some other builds I've seen that use this subclass, I'm not going to be leveraging that force movement to do damage directly, although there are a fair amount of synergies that you can have in your own party with a lot of force movement. You can use things like Spike Growth or Spirit Guardians and other emanation spells and knock enemies into those to get damage. You can even knock enemies into the range of characters that have the new Polar Master feat, and because that's no longer an opportunity attack, force movement does trigger that, so that's another potential thing that you can do. But generally speaking, the enemies that this character fights they're gonna get batted back and forth and smashed upon the rocks as if, you know, we are the forces of the tides themselves. This character is also going to be pretty darn durable and versatile with a lot of high out of combat utility, as druids just tend to have. And the books that you're going to need for this build, you're going to need the Player's Handbook, the 2024 version, as well as Xanathar's and Tasha's. Although I will say, all the spells I'm using, a couple of them are out of Xanathar's and weren't reprinted, but everything in Tasha's that I was going to use, I checked, it was reprinted, so you don't actually technically need that book. And this build will function perfectly fine without any of the Xanathar spells, although missing like absorb elements might hurt a little bit. All right, so our build at level 1, we are starting as a fighter. And I went back and forth between fighter, ranger, and druid for the starting class, but I ultimately went with fighter, and allow me to explain. So, as a fighter, we get proficiency in strength saves and constitution saves. Namely, constitution saving throws will support our casting of spells, and as we're going to be in relatively close range, we're probably going to get hit at least a fair amount, and so having proficiency in constitution saving throws from the start will help us keep our concentration spells up. We also get proficiency with simple and martial weapons, as well as light armor, medium armor, heavy armor, and shields for beginning as a fighter. Now, one of the nice things is getting these armor and weapon proficiencies from another class will save us from having to waste our primal order pick in druid at level 1 on warden. So we'll be free to pick magician as soon as we go into our main class, which is going to be druid. Additionally, I also really wanted weapon masteries on this character. One of the things that I've been finding ever since I did my druid class overview, and if you want to check that out for the 2024 rules, I'll put a link up there, is that druids will actually do more sustained resource free damage using weapons with true strike and the elemental fury option that adds damage to your attacks. It's called primal strike, than you would do just by using other cantrips and using potent cantrip. So this character, I want to integrate some of that learning as well, and the weapon masteries are just going to go really well with the kind of overall concept of the character that we're going to make. All right, for our fighting style choice, I'm going to take defense just to boost our armor class. We also get 2 uses of second wind per long rest, and we recharge 1 on a short rest now as a fighter, and we can use this to recover 1d10 plus our fighter level and hit points as a bonus action. Probably going to use this out of combat, maybe in combat if you need a heal. And then our weapon masteries, we get to pick 3 weapons. Now the weapons I want to pick the pike. This is going to be our main weapon. It has the push mastery, so whenever we hit a creature with it, if they're large or smaller, we can push them 10 feet. And it also has reach, which is going to be really important for kind of how this build functions. The other options I'm going to take the light crossbow, which is ranged and has the slow mastery to reduce the target speed by 10 feet. And then I'm also going to take the trident. I feel like the trident is thematically very appropriate for a character like this. And because it has the topple mastery, which knocks creatures prone, it's actually very effective against flying creatures if you throw it that you might encounter later in the game. One of the cool things with this build is because I'm going to be getting True Strike, spoiler, from my origin feat in Wisdom, we can use all of these weapons with our Wisdom stat, provided that we're using True Strike, and that's something that's going to be very, very solid. For our starting equipment, I'm just going to take all the gold and I'm going to spend it. The total here is less than the 205 available in that sum, but let's get some chainmail, a shield, all 3 of our weapons, so the pike, the light crossbow, and the trident. Let's get some ammunition, and then a component pouch or a druidic focus to cast our spells with. The component pouch is more expensive but more universal, and you can just like wear it on your belt. But the druidic focuses, you may have to hold them and that kind of thing. Yeah, it should be fine there. Generally speaking, this character is going to want to use the best heavy armor that you can get, actually. So eventually we're going to be going up to plate. Yes, this is going to be a plate armor wearing druid. And one of the things I love about the 2024 rules is there are no restrictions on metal armor in the player's handbook. So we're going to take advantage of that. Additionally, because the pike has the heavy property, we have disadvantage on all attacks with it if we don't have a strength of at least 13. So one of the things I decided when I was designing this character is that if I really want to use the pike, I need to end up being strength at a pretty reasonable amount, which is why this character is actually going to go into heavy armor. For our background, I'm going to just make a custom background per the rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide, but honestly, you can use the stage background. It actually does match all the ability scores that this character wants. Specifically, you need 1 of strength or constitution and then wisdom. And sage gives you constitution, intelligence, and wisdom, so it'll work perfectly fine. Doesn't really matter what skills you pick, but the feat that we want is Magic Initiate Wizard. And so this gives us 2 cantrips and a first level spell. The first level spell we can cast once per long rest without spending a spell slot, and then we can also use our spell slots on it. For our cantrips, we're going to pick True Strike, and then you can pick whatever you want. Maybe something like Blade Ward. I think I'll probably take Mind Sliver on my character as something that targets a save and applies a nice debuff. But these cantrips will use our choice of casting attribute, and we want to use wisdom. So now if we use our true strike with our weapons, they will all use our wisdom modifier. And one of the things I love about the new true strike cantrip is that you get to maintain your weapon's range. So if we attack with a reach weapon like the pike, that we can still use true strike from 10 feet away. If we use true strike with our light crossbow, we can still fire it from pretty long range. And then, of course, the shield spell is going to actually make our AC very high on demand because we're going to be in heavy armor with the defense fighting style. Maybe with a shield if you want. I did think about using the whip a little bit on this build. And with the shield spell, we'll just be able to pump our AC to the stratosphere when we need to. For our ability scores, I'm using the point by method as always when I do my builds. So let's get a strength of 15, a dexterity of 12, a constitution of 13, and one of our +1s there, and then a wisdom of 15 with our +2 there. Now you could drop your strength, but I wanted to use heavy armor and have at least 13 for my pike, and so and then I had 4 points left over after leaving my constitution at 14, so I thought I might as well pump my dexterity to get my initiative up a little bit, and I'm actually going to be increasing that later on with a few feats after we cap our wisdom. But yeah, this gives us a starting hit points of 12, so 10 from being a fighter +2 from our constitution. All right, for our race, I'm going to take Goliath, and I'm going to use the Hill ancestry. There are a couple reasons for this, although honestly, many races could work. Human for another beat would be great. Orc could be fun to run faster. A lot of the elf ones could be on point. But the reason I wanted to go Goliath here is that Goliaths have a 35-foot base speed, and one of the tactics that this character will probably be employing at higher levels, although it's actually not our best single target option, is to use Conjure Woodland Beings, and this spell benefits from you being pretty quick. So the Goliath has a 35-foot base speed, which is one of the highest. It's tied for the highest with the Wood Elf in the 2024 Player's Handbook. If you really wanted to go nuts, you could take a Centaur out of Monsters of the Multiverse for a 40-foot speed to do something like this, but I feel like a Centaur in the middle of the storm over the ocean doesn't really fit, and I feel like a Goliath does a lot better. But as for Hill Goliath, we get Hill's Tumble, which is something we can use our proficiency bonus times per long rest. What this does is if we can knock a large or smaller creature prone when we hit it with a weapon attack and deal damage to it. Now, one of the cool things with this is it works with both weapons and spells. Just we have to make an attack roll. So we can do this with our true strikes. We could do this with a thorn whip or any other cantrip that we might have down the line. We also have a bonus action we can take to become large once per long rest, and this one also bumps our movement speed up. And this will be really nice, although I didn't use it in any of my damage calculations because this character is a bit bonus action heavy, but it will be a nice thing to have around and expands your overall area of effect. And you'll probably be using this, especially if you're going to go with the Conjure Woodland Beings tactics at some of the later levels. And then we also have a powerful build, which gives us, we have more carrying capacity and we're better at resisting grapples. And again, a lot of other ancestries could work, but I really wanted to kind of amplify our control abilities. My second choice for our Goliath ancestry would have been the Cloud to give us the bonus action teleports. All right, at level 2, we are taking our first level in Druid, and we're going to be Druid the rest of the way here. So as a first level Druid, we get the ribbon featured Druidic, so we know the special language of Druids, and we always have Speak with Animals prepared. And then we get the Primal Order, so this is a choice between Magician and Warden. Warden gives you medium armor and martial weapons, but I already have those because I'm a fighter 1, so we are free to take Magician, so we get an extra Druid cantrip, and we can add our Wisdom modifier to our Arcana and Nature checks. As for our spellcasting ability is Wisdom. We can use a Druidic Focus, and we get 3 cantrips and 4 prepared spells. Now, as for this cantrips that you're going to pick, I'm going to take Produce Flame because Goliaths don't have dark vision, so that'll give us a light source. I'll take Guidance, and I'll take Thorn Whip. I like having the force movement there. And then, since we're a Druid, we can swap out our prepared spells on any long rest, but the ones I might get here at level 1 are Absorb Elements, Healing Word, Jump for extra mobility, and Ice Knife. And really our tactics here at level 2 are basically running around and true striking things with our pike, pushing them and knocking them down, maybe cutting back and using that prone condition in the force movement to try to kind of control enemies and keep them at bay at a distance. Moving on to level 2, we're going to take another level 1 druid. So we get our wild shape, we get 2 charges per long rest and recover 1 per short rest. We can know 4 animal forms with a max challenge rating of 1/4, and none of them can fly. And we also get the wild companion feature. Now I'm not planning on using wild shape a huge amount on this character, at least in our general tactics. You'll probably use it a lot more in RP out of combat, so I'm not going to dive into it a super huge amount. But wild companion lets us spend a wild shape charge or a spell slot to cast Find Familiar without any material components, and it's a Fey, and it lasts until we finish a long rest. Now I plan on having this up pretty much all the time. If your DM targets your familiar down, that will be a bit of a downside, but having a familiar is just very powerful for scouting and provides a lot of utility in combat in general, and it's actually not really that expensive for us to try to keep this up at all times. Assuming, again, that your DM doesn't just kill it immediately all the time. All right, moving on to level 4, we're going to be a Druid 3, and we get our Circle of the Sea subclass. So the first thing that we get from this is our circle spells. So we get Ray of Frost, and then we get Fog Cloud, Thunder Wave, Gust of Wind, and Shatter, always prepared. We also get the Wrath of the Sea feature, which is kind of their core feature that uses their wild shape. So it's a bonus action to activate and uses a wild shape charge. Creates a 5-foot emanation around you. You get to pick one enemy you can see in that area when you cast it, and then every time you choose to reactivate it for the next 10 minutes. The creature has to make a con save against your spell save DC, and on fail, they take your wisdom modifier plus times your wisdom modifier number of d6s of cold damage, and you can push them up to 15 feet. Now, one of the things that has been lauded a lot about this feature is the fact that it doesn't do any damage or anything on a failure. However, I feel like it's basically an attack against the enemy's constitution save. It's kind of equivalent to making an attack which don't do anything on a miss anyway, and as I will show with the damage calculations, it's actually a pretty reasonable amount of damage that you can expect to do with this. Yeah, it's not insignificant, and the pushing back and forth will just do very well with kind of our overall themes. Now, again, one of the things here, with a range of only 5 feet and us kind of wanting to kite back and forth, this is where the push mastery with the pike comes in. So if there's a creature within 5 feet of us at the start of our turn, we should try to use Wrath of the Sea immediately to push them away. If they pass their save and don't get pushed, then we'll hit them with the pike and knock them away, maybe knock them prone and try to move back. If we need to approach a creature, we can basically do the same thing, walk up, use Wrath of the Sea, push them up to 15 feet depending on how much move speed we have left, walk up to our max pike reach, and then hit them again and push them away again. So we can potentially move enemies up to 25 feet a turn at this point, and 2 distinct pushes of 10 and 15 feet plus your own positioning. You could potentially maneuver enemies to say knock them off a cliff by getting them out of cover around an obstacle and then swinging for the fence and knocking them down. And this is a pretty large amount of force movement for this level, and this is the kind of thing, soft things that don't come into the math, but again, pushing an enemy up to 25 feet away is potentially a big deal. Also, one of the other things I actually really like about this subclass is that Druids in general lack good blasting spell options. Now, Thunder Wave is on the Druid list, but Shatter is not. And so now we have a decent way to spend our spell slots, and one of the things that I've found as a Druid is usually, historically, I would just cast a concentration spell and then do cantrips or some kind of at-will thing, and having single-use spells that aren't concentration is actually a big deal for a Druid in general, and I think that's one of the things that kind of goes overlooked with this subclass's spells. All right, moving on to level 4, we get our first ability score improvement or feat, and I'm going to take Warcaster. This was probably pretty obvious, and we're going to bump our wisdom to 18, but this gives us advantage on our concentration checks. So now we have advantage and proficiency from being a fighter, so we are pretty much set to keep our concentration as much as possible at this point. We can also replace opportunity attacks with spells, provided they only target one creature. And so we can now opportunity attack True Strike with our pike, which is great. And we also can, provide the somatic components for spells with our hands full. This is only going to be important if we're going to use our shield and like a weapon in the other hand. So if you want to use a whip or like a warhammer or your trident, your shield for those themes, you can do that now. Although I'm not really planning on doing this, I'm planning on using the pike pretty much the whole way. Our wild shape also gets an improvement here. The CR goes up and we get a few more forms. And since we're a level 5 character, the power of our cantrips goes up. We also get a new cantrip. Pick whatever you want. Yeah, so our True Strike gets an extra d6 here. In terms of other second level spells you might consider preparing, I would consider things like Moonbeam, Pass Without Trace, Hold Person, Spike Growth, which is a great spell, especially if you have this amount of force movement. Although I'm not actually planning on using Spike Growth for this character's primary tactics, as we'll see in a little bit. At level 6, we are a Druid 5, so we get another round of subclass spells, and we get Lightning Bolt, which is the reason I was considering this subclass for my Storm Shaman build, and we also get Water Breathing. Now, Water Breathing is on the Druid class list, but we always have it prepared. It's a ritual to cast, and it lasts for 24 hours, so just fire it off either before or after a long rest, and your whole party will basically be able to breathe underwater the whole time. But one of the great things that we get here is the Wild Resurgence feature. And I think this is something some other content creators kind of overlooked when reviewing this subclass. One of the things that was criticized is that you're not going to have enough wild shape charges to use your wild shape out of combat and in combat because you only get 2 per long rest and 1 per short rest. Well, what this feature does is on our turn, we can convert a spell slot to a wild shape charge, no action required, and then once per long rest, we can convert a wild shape charge into a first level spell slot. But what this essentially does is, so long as we have spell slots, we have wild shape charges, which means that we'll be able to use our wild shape for our Wrath of the Sea in pretty much every combat that we want to, so long as we are willing to set aside a few first level spell slots. And Lightning Bolt, again, is a great blasting spell and another way to use our high level slots. However, that said, the spell that I want to prepare here for our go-to damage per round is going to be Summon Fey, and it's actually what we're planning on using the rest of this character's career, if we're going to try to maximize our single target sustained damage per round. So, level 6, it is time to go into our first damage report, so let's kind of see what our tactics generally are. So in the first round, we're going to cast our Summon spell. Summon Fey is the priority here, although I would also prepare Summon Beast to use with your second level spell slots if you're out of thirds. And then we'll activate our Wrath of the Sea. Our familiar from our Wild Companion is going to use its action to set up help for our next attack to give us advantage. In round 2 and beyond, we're going to True Strike with our Pike, which should have advantage, and then we'll activate our Wrath of the Storm, our Wrath of the Sea with our bonus action. And then our Summon Fey will attack, and our Familiar will continue to help. And again, the order of your Wrath of the Sea and your Pike's attack is going to depend on your spacing and that kind of thing. The form of the Fey that we're going to pick is going to be Fuming, so it gets advantage on its first attack after it teleports, and then we're going to use the Land Beast for those encounters when we don't have enough third level slots to cast Summon Fey. All right, so our numbers at this point, our True Strike with our Pike should have advantage from help, doing a d10 plus a d6 plus 4 radiant damage. Our Wrath of the Sea has a DC of 15 and does 46 cold on a failure, along with that push. And then our Summon Fey is plus 7 to hit with advantage, doing 2d6 plus 6 force damage. So, and we also have a few blasting options between Thunderwave, Shatter, and Lightning Bolt. Although we may or may not have the spell slots to use them, this level is probably the tightest one in terms of the damage reports for our spell slot usage. So, with those numbers, our peak damage per round against an enemy with an armor class of 10 is 37.1, and against a typical AC of 15 is going to be 30.7. Now, this peak damage per round is basically our damage per round in round 2 and beyond. So, how about if we amortize this kind of peak damage per round over a 4 round encounter? So this is going to include our setup round where we didn't get to make a True Strike attack with our Pike. So against an armor class of 10, we're down to 33.7, and against an armor class of 15, we're down to 27.6. Now, if we take this and stretch it out over the course of a full day, so now we're going to have four round encounters. Our schedule for this is 2 combats, a short rest, and then another 2 combats. In terms of the resources I'm allocating all of our wild shape charges, so that's going to be 3 2, and then 1 from our 1 short rest, and then 2 first level spell slots. So that way we have 5 total charges of Wild Shape, 1 to use our familiar, and then 1 for each Wrath of the Sea across those 4 encounters. As for our other spell slots, we're going to use both of our 3rd levels for Summon Fey and then 2 2nd level slots for Summon Beast. This leaves us with 1 2nd level slot and 2 1st level slots available for anything else across the Adventuring Day. Remember, we also have 1 free cast of our shield spell. Also, it is important to note our Summon Beast is actually not far behind the damage output of a Summon Fey if it has advantage, which I thought was a relatively interesting thing. But our daily average under these circumstances against an armor class of 10 is 33 damage per round, and against an armor class of 15 it is 26.8. And honestly, that's not that far behind our max output encounter, and that's just because, again, the Summon Beast is actually not that far behind the Summon Fey. So if you wanted to save your 3rd level slots and just use Summon Fey, then you maybe fire off a few lightning bolts or maybe a Call Lightning if the enemies are grouped and that kind of thing. That is a reasonable way to go at this point. Now, the damage per round of our Wrath of the Sea at this point is 6.3 against enemies that have a +5 to their saves and 9.8 against enemies that don't have any bonus. And if you look at that 6.3 and our daily average, that accounts for right about 25% of our total damage output at this level. All right, moving on to level 7, we get another Wild Shape charge per long rest, and we get our next subclass feature, which is called Aquatic Affinity. This extends the Wrath of our Sea, the range of our Wrath of the Sea to 10 feet from 5, which is a big deal. Now that matches perfectly with the reach of our pike, so we should never actually have to potentially end our turn within 5 feet of any enemies. And we also get a swim speed equal to our speed. I think you could have had this earlier, and that is a gripe that I do agree with, although you can turn into something that can swim at level 2 as a druid. So I don't know. The big thing here, this is kind of a meh level, except for that range on the Wrath of the Sea is actually a really big deal. Yeah. All right, moving on to level 8, we are going to be a Druid 7. We get Control Water and Ice Storm for our subclass spells. Now, both of these options are already on the Druid list, but they do fit the theme of the class, and Ice Storm is a reasonable blasting option for a 4th level slot, although if you're just looking for damage, a Lightning Bolt's probably going to be better. We also get the Elemental Fury feature here, and this is a choice between Potent Cantrip and Primal Strike. Now we're going to take Primal Strike. What this does is once on each of our turns when we hit with a weapon attack or an attack from a wild shape form, we can do an extra d8 cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage, our choice when we make the hit. And so this will just be an extra d8 damage that'll go on top of our True Strike. There are a lot of good 4th level spells here, particularly Conjure Woodland Beings. If you are in a situation where you need sustained area damage, Conjure Woodland Beings is going to be your go-to spell. That said, even with the tactic of using your ready action to ready movement, which doubles the damage output of Conjure Woodland Beings, it's still not as much single target damage as just using Summon Fey. So I'm going to keep planning on using Summon Fey for all of our damage reports, but that said, if you have large areas, like large groups of creatures, you probably should be using Conjure Woodland Beings from here on out in those encounters. And so some of the optimizing I've done with our move speed and growing to large size and that kind of thing is so that we can be better at doing that, although I'm not going to show the numbers for that. There are a lot of other good 4th level druid spells here, like Polymorph, Wall of Fire, Giant Insect, all great, fantastic spells that we will now have access to. Moving on to level 9, we're going to be a Druid 8, and we can now know 8 wild shape forms with a max challenge rating of 1, and we can fly. So the flying Conjure Woodland Beings Owl Druid is now on the menu, and although that is going to be a tactic this character can use, again, I'm not going to show the numbers for it. We also get an ability score improvement or feat here, and I'm going to bump our wisdom to 20. Now, the other option is to take the Mage Slayer feat here. Mage Slayer is very powerful, and I have covered just how powerful it is in the video that you can see up there. And if I were to get Mage Slayer here, I would actually use it to bump my dexterity over my strength. Yeah, in a real game, I would actually probably take Mage Slayer here, depending on how things are going, because it boosts your mental resilience quite a bit. However, taking 20 wisdom makes our damage look better on the spreadsheet, so that's what I'm going to take here. Yeah, again, you might want Mage Slayer at this level. If not, we're going to get it with our next ability score improvement at Druid 12. All right, at level 9, it is time for our next damage report. So what has changed since last time? Well, the range of our Wrath of the Sea has increased to 10 feet, which means our tactics are much more synonymous. We don't have to worry a huge amount about that. We've also gotten 4th level spells and slots, namely Conjure Woodland Beings, and we also have Elemental Fury, and we've capped our Wisdom at 20. Our damage per round tactics haven't changed, except we're just going to cast Summon Fey all the time here instead of Summon Beast. You could use Summon Beast if you wanted to drop down to 2nd level slots, but we're probably going to be trying to preserve those. Other than that, our tactics haven't really changed. And again, Summon Fey does better single target than Conjure Woodland Beings, even with the using your action to ready movement type tactic. Also, a single pike True Strike attack also does more single target damage than Conjure Woodland Beings. But again, multiple target situation, Conjure Woodland Beings probably the way to go. Here are our numbers at this point. We have gained a D8 onto our True Strike Pike, and the damage of our Wrath of the Sea has gone up by a D6 since we've capped our Wisdom at 20. And our Summon Fey now gets to make 2 attacks, the first one with advantage because we are upcasting it to level 4. In terms of some of the other tactics here, you can do spike growth tactics with this character. Again, we have a lot of force movement between the Pike and the Wrath of the Sea, and I would absolutely flavor the spike growth as barnacles for this character. Barnacles are pretty nasty. If you've ever stepped on one barefoot, they chop you up pretty bad. We can also do use the Flying Owl form with Conjure Woodland Beings if we want, and we have a fair amount of blasting spells that we can potentially use at this point. All right, our peak DPR using our tactics here has jumped up to 62.1 against an enemy with armor class of 10 and 50.6 against the more reasonable AC of 16. And this is about a 65% increase over last time in terms of our peak damage per round. For our max output encounter of 4 rounds, where we account for the fact that we took some time to set up this peak DPR in the first turn, our average DPR across a 4-round encounter is 57.2 against a low armor class or 46.1 against a higher armor class, and this is about a 67% increase yet again. As for our daily average, again, that same schedule of 2 combats, short rest, 2 more combats. Our averages are to 50.3 and 39.4 against an armor class of 16. In terms of our resource usage, we are planning on using all 3 of our wild shape charges here, plus the one we get from our short rest, and 1 first level spell slot to fuel our wild companion, and all 4 of the combats with Wrath of the Sea. Then for our Summon Fey, we're using 2 4th level slots and 2 3rd level slots. This leaves us with 3 1st level slots, 3 2nd level slots, and 1 3rd level slot potentially free. And we've upped our daily average damage per round by about 47%. As for our Wrath of the Sea, damage per round, it's contributing about 8.8 damage per round against enemies that have +6 to their saves at this point, which is about 22% of our overall damage in those high armor class situations. Again, that's not unreasonable, and it's still contributing a fair amount. Moving on to level 10, we're going to be a Druid 9. We get Conjure Elemental and Hold Monster from our subclass spells. As for other things that you get here that include 5th level spells, I would consider options like Maelstrom or Wrath of Nature from Xanathar's Guide to Everything, as those were spells that were not reprinted in the player's handbook. Our upcast of Conjure Woodland Beings are still improving, but it's still less single target damage than Summon Fey plus True Strike, even if you use the ready movement tactic. In my opinion, Conjure Elemental is not very good. It's also on our class list, but Hold Monster is an amazing control spell and a great thing to have in this character's arsenal. At level 11, we are a Druid 10, and we get the Stormborn feature. So this is a really cool one. While our Wrath of the Sea is active, we get a fly speed equal to our speed, so we can finally fly above the water in that vortex of cold and just be overall very powerful there. And we also get resistance to cold, lightning, and thunder damage while our Wrath of the Sea is active. So now you probably should be flying above the battlefield, whacking people with your pike and smacking them around. And you get excellent mobility and honestly pretty solid defenses from this feature. And as a level 11 character, the power of our cantrips also go up, so that means another d6 for our True Strike. Moving on to level 12, we don't get any class features, but we do get 6th level spells. The 6th level options, a lot of them are pretty okay in combat, but they mostly shine in terms of control and utility and that kind of thing. And in the optimal case, I plan on using our 6th level slot to cast Summon Fey, as this will give it 3 attacks. Moving on to level 13, we're going to be a Druid 12, and here take Mage Slayer or Wisdom, whichever you didn't take last time. I'm going to take Mage Slayer at this point. This is usually a good point to fortify your mental resilience going into level 13 and beyond. I'm going to bump my dexterity with this. You could bump your strength, but this character doesn't really need strength for pretty much anything, so we don't really care. And then there's going to be one more general feat that we're going to get by the end of the character, and I do want to take another dex one, so I'm putting it in dex to just boost that there. And again, Mage Slayer does a better job of protecting our mental saves than Resilient would. So yeah. One of the other things that kind of sucks about level 12 for all full casters is you don't get any spell progression, so no new slots, no new prepared spells, so this is just Mage Slayer. At level 13, it is time for our next damage report. So what has changed since last time? We've gained Mage Slayer for defenses, we've gained 5th and 6th level spells and slots. Mainly we're going to use to upcast Summon Fey for our math. Our cantrips have scaled, and we've gained Flight and some resistances with Wrath of the Sea. Tactics-wise, we haven't changed. We're just going to be upcasting our Summon Fey to level 6, level 5, or level 4, depending on what slots we have available. Yeah, here are our numbers. Our True Strike with our pike now has that extra d6 of radiant damage, and the DC of our Wrath of the Sea is bumped up because our spell save DC has gone up. We now have 3 attacks with the Summon Fey, although only the first one is going to have advantage because it is fuming and it teleported. All right. And yeah, we still have all the other tactics we had available before. We also have some new control spells like Maelstrom that we could use. And other than that, it's pretty much the same. In terms of our peak damage using our tactics at this point, against an armor class of 10, we're up to 86.3. And against an armor class of 17, we're up to 68.9. This is a 36% increase in our peak damage per round against that reasonable high armor class, which this is probably the smallest increase that we're going to see across the course of our career. If we average that max output encounter over 4 rounds, we're down to 80.4 and 63.5 against an armor class of 17. This is a 38% increase in our max damage output for these encounters. And then for our daily average, we're at 66.3 and 52.8 against an armor class of 17 with that same encounter schedule. Again, we are committing all of our wild shape charges and a first level spell slot as a wild shape charge to make sure that we can use Wrath of the Sea every encounter and have our familiar. And then we're committing our 6th level slot, 2 5th level slots, and our 4th level slot to Summon Fey. At this point, our Wrath of the Sea damage per round is still at 8.8 against creatures with a bonus of 7 to their Constitution saves. And at this point, this is the low point on the beginning of the low point for how much Wrath of the Sea contributes to our damage per round. It's right about 17% or right about 1/6 of our damage at this level. Moving on to level 14, at Druid 13, we don't get any features. Most of the 7th level Druid spells are mostly utility. I'm still planning on upcasting Summon Fey or Conjure Woodland Beings if you have an encounter that's more suited for area of effect damage per round rather than single target. At level 15, we're at Druid 14, and we get the Sea Druid capstone, which is called Oceanic Gift. This lets us manifest our Wrath of the Sea around a willing creature within 60 feet. They gain all the benefits, including the ability to fly and the resistances, and they can use our spell save and DC when they activate the feature with their bonus action. And if we spend 2 charges, both them and us get Wrath of the Sea. So from here on out, I'm going to be planning on doing this all the time. Our ideal target to put Wrath of the Sea around is going to be a willing ally who doesn't have a reliable use for their bonus action. Ideally, we just use we have a party member who doesn't do that, but we could just use our familiar or maybe even our summon. And so I'm just going to assume from here on out when I'm calculating damage that we're going to get 2 triggers of Wrath of the Sea per round, so we actually get to double its damage with this feature. There's also a lot of defensive and utility potential here. You can make your allies fly, and that's always a good thing. Moving on to level 16, we are a Druid 15. We get improved Elemental Fury, so our extra damage just bumps up to 2d8, which is a nice little boost. The 8th level spells that we get access to are mostly utility and not strictly good concentration spells for combat, although Tsunami is quite powerful and thematic, and it can absolutely devastate encounters, and this would be a fun one to use. Again, mathematically, the best thing for single target sustained damage per round is just to use our 8th level slot to cast Summon Fey. Moving on to the final level I do for these, level 17, we're going to be a Druid 16, and we get an ability score improvement. I'm going to take Speedy to bump our dex to 14. This gives us a plus 10 bonus to our movement speed, so we'd be up to 45 at this point. We can, when we take the dash action, we ignore difficult terrain, and all opportunity attacks against us have disadvantage. So we're going to be extra speedy and able to reposition now, and if we're using things like Conjure Woodland Beings, we'll be able to encompass even more of the battlefield with that. You could absolutely take something like Resilient Dex or another feat to boost your dexterity, or if you wanted to pump your constitution for more hit points, you could. Although, honestly, in my opinion, I would be happy with the 14 constitution and the number of hit points that this character has. Although, if you want more, you could absolutely bump your constitution instead, or maybe take a feat like Tough. Maybe even be a human and take Tough as a second origin feat. And finally, the power of our cantrips also goes up here as a level 17 character. So that'll be an extra d6 on True Strike. Moving on to our final damage report. We have gained Speedy, 7th and 8th level spells and slots. Our cantrips have scaled. We've gained Oceanic Gift to double the damage, essentially, of Wrath of the Sea. And we've also gained another d8 from improved Elemental Fury. In terms of our tactics, they haven't really changed, other than we're going to apply Wrath of the Sea to another creature as well as ourselves, consuming 2 charges. And then we're going to plan on whoever gets our Oceanic Gift using Wrath of the Sea every round as well. So in theory, the damage output from Wrath of the Sea here should double. Here are our numbers here. We have plus 11 to hit at this point, assuming we don't have a magic item, because I never assume those, and our save DC is up to 19. But we do have, again, 2 potential procs of Wrath of the Sea, and in our ideal encounter, we're casting Summon Fey with an 8th level slot, and it's going to stick around the whole time and get 4 attacks per round. Yeah, we have a lot of potential tactics with all of our blasting spells, our Maelstrom, our hold monster, all our control options, and we can totally use Spike Growth if we want to stick to lower level spells and that kind of thing. All right, our peak damage per round, if we're doing our Summon Fey tactic here, is going to be 135 against an armor class of 10 and 103.4 against the reasonable armor class of 18 for this level. And this is a 50% increase in our peak damage per round. If we amortize this over a 4-round encounter, including that turn to set up, we are at a damage per round of 127 against an armor class of 10 or 96 against an armor class of 18. This is an increase of, again, just over 50% at 51 for our max output encounter. Going to our daily average over our 4-round encounters, so 2 combats, short rest, 2 combats, we're doing 94 damage per round against the low armor class and 80 against the reasonable armor class of 18. In terms of the resources that we're planning for this, I'm planning on using all of our wild shape charges, which is going to be 3 plus 1, then all of our first level slots for Wrath of the Sea as well, and then we also have to use a 2nd level slot to get a familiar. And then we're going to use our 8th level, our 7th level, our 6th level, and 1 5th level for Summon Fey. This leaves us with a decent amount of 3rd level slots and 2nd level slots and some 4th and some 5th level slots. And this is an increase of 52% for our daily average damage per round. Now, you may not actually need to, use all of your spell slots to get Oceanic Gifted Wrath of the Sea every single combat, but because of Wild Resurgence, we can, and so I just wanted to show what's possible, and that's kind of where these damage numbers are from. In terms of this level, our Wrath of the Sea damage per round in theory has doubled up to 17.6 against enemies with a plus 8 to their constitution saves, and 31.6 against enemies that don't have any bonus whatsoever. If we look at that 17.6 number at this point across our daily average, that accounts for just right about 22% of this character's total damage output. All right, so with that done, it's time to summarize. So what is the overall score of this build? Now to calculate this, I take all of our peak damage per round numbers at all of our damage reports and average them into one number. So for this character, that is a 71.8. And this is actually better than my previous damage per round build that I've made under the 2024 rules, which is the Draconic Trickster. You can check that out up there. That's a really cool sorcerer rogue build that combines innate sorcery with sneak attack and quicken spell and the ready action to do double sneak attacks. This build actually outperforms that here. Now I do calculate overall scores for a few other things, so let's check those and see how it compares. So if we take our average for our max output for our 4-round encounters against a high armor class, this character gets a 58.3. This is still better than the Draconic Trickster, which was a dedicated damage per round build, although it did have very good control at high levels, thanks to a pretty cool combo of the hide action plus Arcane Trickster's magical ambush feature. And finally, for our average, for our daily average for our four round encounters, looking at the high armor class only, this character scores in at 49.8. Now, interestingly, this is actually almost exactly the same as my Draconic Trickster build. That build scored in at a 49.9. Although that said, that character used far less resources to achieve that and still had a reasonable number left to do control spells. But again, we were going pretty much all out with this druid using Summon Fey. Now, if I was going to take this build to level 20, I would just go Druid the rest of the way. This gives us 9th level spells. It gives us the ability to cast spells in wild shape with our Beast Spells feature. It gives us an epic boon feat. The one I would probably take on this character, it would depend on the campaign, but I think Dimensional Travel, Fortitude, Speed, or Spell Recall would probably be the best. I think I favor Dimensional Travel of all of those. Now, should you have tactical variety on a character like this? Absolutely. Just because Summon Fey, True Strike, and Wrath of the Sea yield the highest single target sustained damage per round does not mean you should be doing that every turn of every encounter. This character has so many great blasting and control options and has spell slots to spare to use them. You also have things that you can do using your giant form with Conjure Woodland Beings to cover a pretty wide area. You can boost your speed with the jump spell and that kind of thing. This character has a lot of options that they can do, and they are by no means limited to just the tactics I showed in this video to maximize your single target damage per round. One of the things I love about all Druid builds is you have extreme utility through all of your spell slots. You have amazing things like Windwalk, Transport via Plants, Resurrection, all sorts of really cool things. And another thing I liked about this build is I felt the damage output of this build is actually pretty competitive and pretty reasonable. One of the things I did find in my testing is that if you combine True Strike with Primal Strike from Elemental Fury, you outperform Magician plus Potent Spellcasting for damage, and so that's something I wanted to do here. Another cool thing I liked with this character is we can use any of our chosen weapons for True Strike, whether we're shooting a crossbow, hitting with a pike, or throwing a trident. We can do True Strike with all of those and use our various weapon masteries. This character also has a lot of force movement and the ability to inflict the prone condition with our Push Mastery, our Giant's Tumble, and Wrath of the Sea. These are pretty much all at will on-demand options. So characters on the enemy side are going to be bouncing around the battlefield and falling down all the time. And I think this would make this character very fun to play and actually very effective in that role. This character is also, again, I think they're reasonably durable. They've got plate armor, they've got the shield spell, they've got absorb elements. You can potentially swap to a physical shield if you want to. And so overall, again, I think this character is going to be quite survivable, or at least survivable enough for my tastes at the table. You're also really fast and you knock enemies around all the time, and it's going to be pretty hard to get to you, especially because you're going to be flying all the time. So honestly, this character might be really annoying for enemies to deal with, even though they get close enough. It's almost like, I'm here, I'm taunting you, but I'm going to back away and send you flying. Also, I really like the potential RP of this build. I really like the imagery of this kind of spell sword Gish druid controlling the powers of a storm flying over the ocean. I feel like this build captures the essence of this subclass in a pretty good way. And I feel like I utilized its features pretty well. It's a lot more than just a simple cheese grater strategy. And yeah, I felt like, this isn't necessarily the best way to use this subclass, but it's a way that uses it in an effective way and kind of showcases what it's capable of. One last question. How good was Wrath of the Sea on this build? So in order to do this, I looked at the amount of damage it output over the course of our career, looking mainly at our daily average damage per round numbers. So about 20% of this build's damage over the course of its career was from Wrath of the Sea. Now, that is, in my opinion, not an insignificant amount. We dedicated a fair amount of resources to this, namely a lot of wild shape charges and a lot of low level spell slots, but thanks to Wild Resurgence, we have the resources to do that. And without this, that our daily average damage per round would be much closer to something like 40, which is, in my opinion, not that good. So in my opinion, again, Wrath of the Sea actually contributed meaningfully to this character's damage, although especially once we were able to double it from level 15 on, thanks to Oceanic Gift. All right, so thanks for watching. This has been our 2024 Gish plate armor wearing, pike wielding Circle of the Sea Druid. Again, I had this one slated for a little later. I moved it up. I think it's going to be a good choice. And I'm overall very pleased with how this build performed. I'm actually rather impressed that it beat out the Draconic Trickster in terms of damage. Although, again, that build is arguably a much better controller at higher levels. It doesn't have the high level spells, but it can land them very effectively because enemies have disadvantage on their saves against them if it does it well. So, yeah, thanks for watching. My name is Nathan. I hope you enjoyed the build. Please let me know what you thought about it in the comments. If you like what you see, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any content, and I will see you later.